Hello and welcome back to Music Ed Now. In today's video we'll be gaining a deeper understanding of When I'm 64 by the Beatles. The areas covered are timestamped below, but we must start with the song's meaning. What you will come to learn is that all of the musical decisions made in When I'm 64 flow from the central meaning of the song. I'm calling chapter 1 on our journey the very fancy
Prosodic intention.
Prosody is a word used to refer to parts of language that convey meaning beyond the words used. Think of it as the music of language. Read the sentence that's on screen now. Depending on how the sentence is said, you could be expressing genuine affection or cynical sarcasm. When it comes to When I'm 64, a very useful way of thinking about the song is through the lens of prosodic intention. In other words, what elements are there on the recording, other than the lyrics, that support the central meaning of the song? When I'm 64 is a masterclass in prosody. Paul McCartney wrote this song about his own father turning 64. The young voice in the song wonders whether his partner will still love him when he's an older man. McCartney's dad had his formative years in the 1920s and 30s. This was an iconic period in the history of music. Jazz big bands ruled the day. Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Bessie Smith, and Benny Goodman were among some of the stars of the time. So what does this have to do with When I'm 64? Well, the song is sung from the perspective of a man in the 1920s and 30s. Therefore, the correct musical genre and reference point is the jazz swing era, which brings us to chapter 2, the instrumentation in When I'm 64. When I'm 64 was orchestrated for 3 clarinets, 2 B-flat clarinets, a bass clarinet, Paul McCartney's signature tenor voice, bass guitar, piano, jazz-style drum kit, and in the B section of the song we hear tubular bells. There was a tiny bit of electric guitar right at the end of the song as well. The clarinet trio do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to the distinct character of the song. They reinforce the idea of a throwback to the jazz era and also give the song a playful, even schmaltzy or cheesy character. They are also important technically, as the bass clarinet doubles Paul McCartney's bass guitar, while the B-flat clarinets play the opening melodic hook, in the verses of the song, the clarinets play long notes to support the chords, and then in between the vocal phrases, they play small melodic passages.
When I get older, losing my head, many years from now.
These melodic breaks have the feel of a musician improvising, which would have been very common in the jazz era. The drum kit too is played in a jazz style. Brushes are used on the snare, and there's the classic hi-hat swung rhythm. When the song switches from a playful mood in the verses to a more serious one in the B section, tubular bells are heard. In the lyrics at this point in the song, our main character is coming to the realization that this is the woman he wants to spend the rest of his life with. The tubular bells at this point in the song maybe symbolize wedding bells in our hero's subconscious.
And if you say the word, I could stay with you.
There's also a little figure that closes out this B section that almost sounds like a musical question. Maybe this is our main character's subconscious kicking in again and considering asking a question, maybe even a marriage proposal. As before, the rhythmic features found in When I'm 64 help to serve the narrative of the song. We get a strong 2-step beat on the kick drum and bass guitar with a gentle backbeat on the snare. Over this strong 2-step pulse, we get yet another nod to jazz with the concept called swung rhythm. Swing in music refers to a lopsided distribution in rhythmic emphasis, usually between pairs of quavers and semiquavers. Here is a simple example. Look at the hi-hat rhythm notated on screen now. Now if we swing the quaver pairs on beats 2 and 4, we get. The first quaver in each pair is played a little longer than the second. This long short feel is swing. Swung rhythm is a very common feature of jazz music. Typically the best way to notate swing is to make a note at the very beginning of the score to say that quaver pairs should be swung, and then leave it to the musician's instinct in how much swing should be applied to the piece. In When I'm 64, swing rhythm also has a very important storytelling role. In the playful A section, everything is swung.
I get older, losing my head, many years from now.
But in the more serious B section, the rhythm is literally straightened up. The rhythms in the vocals are all crotchets and minims, so no opportunity for swung quavers. And we hear straight quavers in the piano part.
You'll be alright.
Other than swing, the other rhythmic feature worth noting is syncopation. Syncopation is when we have rhythmic emphasis on an offbeat in the music. And you guessed it, syncopation is a huge feature of jazz music. There are so many examples of this throughout the song. In the intro, and throughout those playful verses.
Will you still be sending me a Valentine? Birthday greetings, bottle of wine.
But again, when the mood shifts in the B section, we get no syncopation. There is a doubling up of the kick drum and bass guitar on every beat, which intensifies the energy.
You'll be alright.
The musical storytelling here is excellent. We have the loose and carefree energy of the A section, contrasting beautifully with the philosophical and more serious, thought-provoking B section, where our main character is on this psychological journey in considering who he is about to spend the rest of his life with. At the risk of sounding repetitive, the melodic features found in When I'm 64 also reinforce the old jazz style and have a storytelling role. But how can a melody be jazzy? Well, one common feature of melody found in jazz is the use of chromatic notes. Chromatic notes move in semitones even if those notes exist outside of the main key signature. From the very first bar of this entire song, we have chromatic movement. The D sharp in the opening clarinet hook is a chromatic neighbour note as it moves from the chord note E down a semitone to D sharp and then returns to that chord note E. This is also the first line of the song that McCartney sings.
When I get older, losing my head.
The second phrase of the verse also moves chromatically, from the note B to D. We get B, C natural, C sharp, and then finally D.
Will you still be sending me a
And then the end of the phrase also finishes chromatically, descending from B to B flat and then to A.
Valentine?
The same chromatic climb from B to D happens again on Birthday Greetings.
Birthday greetings,
And on the lyric Bottle of Wine, we get a new chromatic note, E flat.
bottle of wine.
The E flat note here is chromatic, but it also introduces another very common feature of jazz. That is the use of blues notes. Blues notes occur when the third or the seventh degree of a major scale are flattened by a semitone. We are in C major here, the third is usually E, and because we get an E flat here in the melody, we've introduced a blues note, the flattened third.
Bottle of wine.
In the B section of the song, the tonality of the melody switches to A minor. This is the relative minor of our main key signature, C major. And here's where the storytelling happens in our melody. Just as we saw with the rhythm, the playful chromaticisms found in the verse are absent in this more contemplative B section.
You'll be alright.
The minor tonality, in addition with the very simple melody, underpins the serious nature of our hero's thoughts at this point in the song. The last thing to note about the melody is the very last phrase McCartney sings.
When I'm 64.
It ends with the notes EEC or Mi Mi Do in tonic solfa. In the context of classical music, this would be considered weakening a perfect cadence. But in many jazz standards, the finishing of a song by going from the third degree of the scale to the root of the scale is very common. Take the end of the very famous jazz standard, All of Me.
So why not take all of me?
We have reached our final chapter, the chords and harmony in When I'm 64. For the first 16 bars of the piece, there is really nothing exceptional about the harmony used. We go between chord 1 of our key, a basic C major triad, to chord 5-7 in our key, which is G7. This is very ordinary stuff harmonically speaking. The 5-7 chord in any key is made by stacking thirds above the 5th note of our key. So for G7 in this key, we start with the root G, then we have the third, which is B, then we have the 5th, which is D, And then to get the 7th, we just simply go up another third from the 5th, and that gives us F. And you'll notice that F is actually a 7th above the root, which is G, and that is why we call it G7. The 5-7 chord is also called the dominant 7th chord in any key. The word dominant in music means 5. If we were talking about the dominant note of a key, we're talking about the 5th degree of the scale. If we're talking about the dominant chord in a key, we're talking about the 5th chord of that key. If we're modulating to the dominant key center, we're modulating from our original key to a key that's a 5th away. And if we have a dominant pedal note, it means that we have a note that is the 5th degree of the key continuously playing in either the top part or the bass part, while chords change around it. For now, what I'd like you to do is put a pin in the idea of a dominant 7th chord, as we're going to return to this theory in a little bit more detail later on. When we get to the lyric, would you lock the door? Here's where we get our first taste of harmonic colour.
If I'd been out till 2:45, would you lock the door?
The chord we want to land on, or our destination chord, is F major. This is the 4 chord in C. To understand this chord move and a couple of chord moves that come a bit later on, we need to talk about a concept called secondary dominance. I promise that this is not too complicated that you won't be able to follow along with me, so please hang in there. To be able to follow along, you'll need to be able to count to 5 and know the alphabet up to G. And then I can fill in any of the chord theory gaps that come along. So we know we're in the key of C major to begin with. And if we pull up a chord bank for C, we can view all the chords that belong to this key. We have already established that the dominant 7th chord in C major is G7 or 5-7 in the key. Dominant 7th or 5-7 chords have the most tension-filled notes in any key. For example, F is the 4th of our home key of C major here, and it happens to be the 7th of the G7 chord. It really wants to resolve down a semitone to the note E. B is a 7th degree of our home key C major, and it happens to be the 3rd of our G7 or 5-7 chord in C. This really wants to resolve up a semitone to C. Because these two notes, which have the most tension in the key, are in that one chord, it creates a really powerful sense of direction in where that chord wants to go. So G7 in the context of C really wants to resolve to C. Now if we take the same principle and we think of all of the chords in our C major chord bank as destinations, as targets for us to try to get to, we can sneak in some dominant 7 chords just before these targets, and they create really colourful progressions. For example, a simple chord progression like C to A minor to F to G can be made to sound more colourful by sticking in some of those dominant 7 chords. So I'll go C, E7, which is the dominant 7th above A minor. Then I'll go C7 to get to F, then D7 to G. So this becomes So this creates a lovely colourful progression, but also a very clear sense of direction in the chords as to where they want to go. So back to When I'm 64. On the lyric, would you lock the door? We go C to C7 and then land on our destination chord, F. C7 is the dominant 7 chord above F. We call this a secondary dominant because our primary key center is C major. So secondary dominants are when we stick in dominant 7 chords to land on those target chords in our home key. On the last line of the verse, we get a string of dominant 7 chords.
Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64?
A7 is the secondary dominant, setting our ear up to hear a D minor, but instead we get D7, which itself is a secondary dominant that leads to G7. And as we discussed earlier, G7 is our primary dominant 7th chord in C major. This is also a very common chord progression found in the last phrase of lots of jazz standards. Remember All of Me from before? Well, at the end of that song, the exact same string of dominant 7 chords happens there.
You took the part that once was my heart, so why not take all of me?
In this way, we can say that there's even prosodic intention in the harmony used in When I'm 64. In the B section, harmony plays a huge role in evoking that serious mood we spoke of earlier. The tonality shifts to A minor and is established with a repeated A minor triad. At the end of the phrase, "you'll be older too," the harmony is the darkest it has been the entire song, as the chords move between the 1 and 5/7 chord of A harmonic minor.
You'll be older.
There is also a dominant pedal E note in the bass of the song at this point that really adds to the tension at this point in the song. The intensity dies down in the following few bars with the introduction of the D minor chord. D minor is common to both A minor and the relative major C major, so it acts as a pivot chord between the two keys and helps to get a smooth transition back into the more playful energy of the verses.
Grandchildren on your knee, Vera, Chuck and Dave.
And that brings our journey through the musical features of When I'm 64 to a close. The main intention of making this video was to show you the level of detail gone into some of the musical decisions in making the song. My hope is that you can take the prosodic intention of When I'm 64 and apply that in your own musical contexts. If you're new here, please consider hitting subscribe. It really is the best way to support what we're trying to build here on Music Ed Now. Until the next video, this has been David Kennedy with Music Ed Now.